Greetings, Vancouver. This is another episode of VancouverReal. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Mike Zaremba, and with me, as always, is my older brother, Andy.
Hey, how's it going?
And Mr. Omid on the helm.
Hello.
And as always, VancouverReal is brought to you, not live, I guess. I shouldn't say live, but we're from Float House. We're broadcasting out of Float House in Gastown here. It's a 9-tank sensory deprivation center. If you're not sure what floating is or sensory deprivation tanks are, I suggest going to our website, floathouse.ca, and you can get all the scoop on that there. And VancouverReal is also brought to you in collaboration between Floathouse and Omega Point YouTube channel, which is Omed's YouTube channel, where he makes a lot of really cool, creative, inspirational videos on there using voiceovers, and kinetic typography is one of his modalities. I remembered it this time.
Yeah. You did it.
First time?
Yeah. So, and I don't know, do you want to just get right into this, or do you want to do a promo code or anything like that?
Yeah, what's a good promo code to give away today?
Let's see, if you want to save some money on a single float, use the promo code YOGA.
I wish we had a promo code Anarchist. That would be great today.
Either that or the VancouverReal, but yeah.
Yeah, or VancouverReal, but we don't have
We'll
that.
make those up. We'll make those and then we'll get those that way we can actually kind of track it. But
Yeah.
So Yoga will save you 20% off of a single float. You're welcome to use that and use it as much as you want. So with that said, today we have I'm excited. We've had ever since.
Super excited. Actually, we talked about this a long time ago. We talked about this years ago, a couple years ago. We're like, we want to do a podcast. We're like, Boldizar, do you want to be on our podcast? And he's like, yeah, I'd love to. So, a soapbox to stand up on, I think.
Yes, exactly. We're going to give you your soapbox today. But our guest today is Mr. Alexander Boldizar, and we're going to coin him the Anarchist Lawyer. And we'll see if that pans out, if that even lasts. But that's kind of a nickname
I think it's going to last.
I think so as well. It's kind of stuck with you.
Usually I get a different A adjective, so I'll take anarchist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. What are you? Who are you? You're a writer. That's your occupation. And I mean, even the type of writing you do, I'm not even sure it's for a financial firm, investment firm that's across the other side of the continent that you communicate with and write nonstop for. You're also a Harvard law graduate. You practice law for, how long did you practice law for?
11 months. For the world's largest law firm.
Right, there you go. So that's something, right?
Yeah. 5 counts.
You lived in Bali for how long?
6 years.
6 years in Bali, and what did you do in Ubud? In Bali?
Well, the first 3 years I was just writing fiction.
Right.
Then I went to New York City for 4. Then I came back to Ubud for 3 more. And the second time around, I was the director of a large art gallery. Got involved with art criticism.
Perfect for you.
All over the place.
And we met Alex 3 or 4 years ago now.
From North Van BJJ.
We actually met by Andy here, tearing a tendon in my hand.
That's right.
That was like one of our first meetings.
It's the only proper way for men to meet, I think, is by beating the crap out of each other. Yeah.
So yeah, we were all part of the same Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club in North Vancouver, North Van BJJ, which is an outstanding club if anyone is looking for some of the best education on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Vancouver. Definitely check them out. But so we were going to North Van BJJ for, I don't know, maybe.
I was going there before you. I was going there for maybe pretty much from when they first opened.
Yeah, almost a year.
Like, I think it was 2008.
Yeah.
And then you moved out here and you started coming there. So I don't know. How long were you there before?
I don't remember. We were at the new club at Genesis Health Club in North Van, and then you joined after you moved back to Vancouver, or you moved to Vancouver.
Yeah, it was the first week I was in Vancouver.
I think in that class, I remember I was rolling with somebody, and then Jeff paired me up with you, and Jeff comes up to me and whistles me. He's like, "He's really strong." I'm like, "Okay." So I actually, at that time, your jiu-jitsu wasn't actually.
There was no jiu-jitsu.
It wasn't like jiu-jitsu. It was just like fighting a grizzly bear kind of. And I was actually able to I think I swept you, and then I put you in an armbar, and I ended up. You were resisting pretty good, and I ended up reefing on it pretty hard, and I ended up tearing a ligament in your wrist. And that injury stuck around for a while.
Yeah, it took about 6. Well, the doctor said I should be out for 6 months. I ended up taping it up, coming back early. But the best thing was that Jeff told me I should tie a shoe around my wrist. But I think he was joking. Anyway,
It's a very Jeff-like
it's a very Jeff-like joke. Yeah. No, but you felt bad, and that was perfect because then you started teaching me all your moves out of guilt.
And then
It's going to turn
6 months later, that's when we started. Yeah, I think that's when actually my daughter was born, and I took a little break and I came back, and or maybe a little after that. But then you basically were just choking me out for the next straight year. So basically like mount, arm triangle, and like tapping. But
I do have one set of moves. I'm quite good at exactly one technique. And I think that's been most of my jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Now it's been.
But the amount of pressure you put on somebody when you're doing that arm triangle it's amazing. Like sometimes you get a little bit scared that I feel like something's gonna pop or something. You know?
Yeah.
It's not just I'm not really as concerned about the choke as much as I am something just like bursting in like a vertebrae or something.
I remember I probably told you this story before, but when we were grappling one time, we were rolling. I tapped one time because you had me in some sort of like you were squeezing my head, my skull, and the legitimate fear that came to my mind was that I don't know if my skull can handle the pressure, and I feared that something would fracture.
Well, that's proper.
So that's why I tapped, because I'm like, I didn't want to test how much pressure my skull could take at that time. So I tapped.
Well, I didn't start jiu-jitsu until I was 38, and I was actually exposed to it much sooner. I did some funny martial arts when I was in law school. I did kung fu, and I saw jiu-jitsu guys. It was 95 or 96. I saw guys doing jiu-jitsu, and I thought, a bunch of sweaty guys rolling around. That's kind of gay. And then, in '99, I was in San Francisco, and there was a jiu-jitsu club, and it was run by Carly Gracie, one of the actual Gracies. There were 6 people in this class, so you get the almost privates from Carly Gracie. I did a few classes, and I was like, it's not for me either. And it really took me until I was old and weak to get into jiu-jitsu, because I grew up with this idea that men don't use technique. You don't duck from a punch, you don't block a punch. You take a punch and you give a punch, and that's proper manly fighting. And so when I finally kind of resigned myself to the idea of compensating for my declining vigor by learning technique, I still had this mindset of the proper thing for a man to do was crush. It's like, okay, I'll grapple, I won't hit, but I had this crushing mindset, and it was interesting. Like, the thing about martial arts is you find your own flaws in a sense, and then
Totally.
my personality had been too much of a bulldozer.
It's very self-revealing in a lot of ways.
Just actually, people roll a lot like their personalities. It's
Yeah.
kind of a reflection of their personality. And I don't know how I rolled, and I probably don't want to know how I rolled.
You're kind of like Boldizar, but I shouldn't say that. You weren't like that. Like, you're a strong guy as well. So when you rolled, you would use like your weight and your strength to your advantage, but strategically. It wasn't like a chaotic thing. But like when you're in north-south position, for example, like you're so good at like leveraging that whoever is on the bottom of your north-south isn't going anywhere.
With like your arm triangle. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
That was like my.
No, you've
my
tapped me a
go-to.
bunch of times with the north-south.
Yeah.
So
Especially
just
no-gi.
before we get too far ahead, I just want to say, like, so Alex is obviously a good friend of ours from a long time, and the reason we wanted to have you on the podcast is just because we always have interesting conversations with you, and Alex is one of those guys. We always call him Boldy, so his name is Boldy. I'm not going to call him Alex anymore. That doesn't even register in my mind. But so Boldy is one of those guys that you always stay up to date on like current affairs. You're kind of our go-to source when we're too lazy to go check facts on news and stuff like that.
And you're a go-to source if we ever get in trouble. We call Boldizar and we're like, okay, so this is the
Legalities.
situation,
Yeah.
and we need some advice.
It's kind of like getting your advice from Groucho Marx, but
But you give us great advice. Like, there's 2 separate times when we needed some advice, and we called you up, and you gave us like amazing advice. That was like real world advice. And actually, after I talked to you, I felt a lot better. I'm like, okay, we're gonna be okay here, most likely.
So and so we always have interesting conversations.
I'm supposed to have this image of being an asshole. You guys are not going along with this asshole persona.
You're the anarchist lawyer.
That's the funny thing is, like, you might come across like that to some people, but you're actually not. You're actually a really nice guy. That's the thing. But you have this kind of crazy wild man mentality, which is what I love. It's like that's why I love hanging out with you and having conversations with you, because it's like you're interesting. You're an interesting character. You know?
And I know when we have a conversation, you're going to say something that's typically not normal and not of the mainstream. Like your views on life in general are just kind of unique, and I appreciate that. And it's really important that those types of views are heard and expressed sometimes. Like, yes, they could be very polarizing, but that's okay. Like, and that's why we wanted to have you on too. It's just like, you know what? Not everyone's going to be in the same frame of mind. And I think that's good for society. I think you want to have all flavors of ice cream.
There's a quote I like. I totally forget who it is, but this guy said, "Okay, we're all in agreement here. Let's take a break and figure out some disagreements, and then we can have a real conversation."
That makes sense.
Agreeing sucks.
Exactly.
So this is way too much of a love-in. So let's get into some subject.
So he is the anarchist lawyer, and he only practiced law for 11 months, but he's got a Harvard Law degree. So, and I mean, you even said how when you were going through your law school, you would purposely kind of almost not agitate your professors, but you would be the one to stand up and question everything almost. And
the funny thing is, it never agitated the professors; it agitated the other students. I actually got hate mail. I got hate mail in my little pigeon box saying, "The fact that you were admitted to Harvard Law School devalues the Harvard name for all the rest of us."
You probably thought that was like a plaque of honor.
Well, it was. But the problem was they signed it, "Your Section 4 friends." They wouldn't sign their actual name. So then I went to everybody and said, "Did you sign? Did you write this? Did you write this?"
You went to every person and asked them?
Yeah, at the end of the class. I stood at the door and I asked every person, "Did you write this?" And everybody said no. Even the people that I eventually found out wrote it. And like, "No, that's terrible. I can't believe somebody here would do that." It's the person who wrote it. So that was a particularly it was a disappointment, because I was coming from McGill, the top people in their class. My roommate at the time became a professor at McGill, and he was a paleontologist. Actually, I was on the Discovery Channel with him. We went to the Sahara looking for dinosaur bones together, went to the high Arctic. He was a nutcase. Like, we knocked each other unconscious in the library once using the biggest books we could find. And that's what I thought was, an intellectual environment where people use big books and they hit each other in the head. And so I thought Harvard would gather all these, crazy book bangers together, and we'd have this wild, book banging party. And it wasn't. It was the exact opposite. It was people who had outworked everybody else to get where they were, and they'd look at the Gropius complex. And Gropius is this form follows function architect that never had to live in his own buildings, because then he would realize that they were so ugly they were non-functional. But anyway, they'd look at the windows, and at 3 a.m. there'd be a light on, and so they'd be freaking out because 4 a.m. somebody somewhere was still studying. And
it's hyper competitive.
It was hyper competitive, and people would make outlines, and they would make fake outlines, or they would make outlines with the best data missing for their friends, and then outlines with mistakes that they would share with people who weren't quite their friends. And I don't mind competitive. I can deal with competitive. I like people, beating each other up. But the problem was, everybody acted so nice. So they were competitive, but it was like a swan. If you ever watch a swan swimming, on the surface they're all floating nicely. Under the water, they're like, yeah.
Right.
And that's what Harvard was like. It was a bunch of vicious swans paddling like crazy.
Right. So you didn't like how people kind of had that two-face approach to it then?
Yeah, it was too tactical for my taste. Like it was kind of like jiu-jitsu. It was the same mindset. I was like, I don't mind somebody saying, "I'm gonna bury you," and then it's a fair match. But saying, "Hey, buddy, how are you?" and then behind your back, sneaking up on you, I didn't enjoy that.
Right.
And that's why I ended up writing my book about this Siberian 300-pound mountain man whose land is stolen by Harvard lawyers, and he goes to try to learn how to defeat the lawyers, and he's got this mindset of, to become
You wrote
chief.
this book already?
Yeah.
What's it called?
It's called The Ugly.
Oh, okay, right. You told me about this.
I published the prologue, and I published 2 other chapters as short stories. And my agent took it out in 2008. It was being considered by an off-print of Penguin they were on the verge of signing, and then Lehman Brothers collapsed, and all the publishers that hadn't actually penned contracts, they just stopped buying stuff.
Okay.
And then I got busy being a dad and paying the bills, and
Right.
I didn't take that final step of contacting small publishers. My agent couldn't place it with the big publishers, and then so the book, it's published in chunks, but the whole thing as a novel is not published.
Not yet.
So
What did you study at McGill?
it's actually at Brooklyn Arts Press right now.
Oh, really?
They asked for it, so there's still some hope.
Nice. Cool. What did you study at McGill?
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Why?
Economics.
Oh, okay, right. All right.
But I did economics because out of 120 credit load, you only had to take 32 in economics. It was the lowest requirement in your major.
So that
and so everything else I could take whatever I wanted. And
that's why you chose it.
That's why I chose it. Well, also, I was an asshole, and I didn't trust my professors. And economics was objective. Like it was math based, and even though I was terrible at math, there was a right answer and a wrong answer.
Right.
Something like English or other subjects is too subjective. And I was very type A. I wanted to get into Harvard. And so I wanted something that if I disagreed with the professors, they couldn't knock me down
Right.
because
It's either
of
right or it's
disagreement. It
wrong.
was right or wrong, and I wanted something that could be marked objectively. But then, and you were graded on your major. But then I took a lot of, I had fun. With the rest of the classes, I was always in the dean's office skipping like the intro to psych and taking a class on learning here, or I'd skip the basic philosophy class and just take advanced logic. And so I ended up developing a good reputation with the dean, and it was like a smorgasbord of
Just
classes
whatever
that
you
you
wanted
could
to
take.
learn.
And McGill was fantastic. Like McGill, co-ed bathrooms, co-ed dorms. The campus was licensed for all of September, so you'd bring a beer to the class while you were shopping.
Really?
I got to Harvard, and there's no frosh groups, no kind of helping you make your friends for you. You were treated like adults.
At McGill.
Yeah, at McGill. I got to Harvard, separate floors for women and men. The women's floors had combination locks that only the women knew. The parties were pizza and Coke, no alcohol, even though we were graduate school by then.
Oh my God.
It was just, and also even in terms of the academics, McGill, you couldn't get an A. There was no A+, but you couldn't get an A if you just regurgitated what the professor had told you. You had to add something on your own for classes that were not straight right and wrong answers. Whereas at Harvard, I did quite poorly my first year because I was always fighting back. I was arguing with the professors. Then I learned my lesson by second and third year. I was doing very well because I was just repeating back them entire sentences from their lectures. And they're like, oh, this guy sounds so smart.
That's all they wanted to hear.
Yeah. So it wasn't the, I mean, there were exceptions. There were some fantastic professors. There were some fantastic people.
Yeah.
But McGill was more of an intellectual environment to me than Harvard Law School. Now, I'm not saying all of Harvard is like the law school. Law attracts a particular type of personality.
Right. How big would a class be at Harvard Law? How big was your class?
Anything from a 7-person seminar to a 150-person.
I mean, like the
basic class.
graduating class, though.
Oh, 550.
Oh, so it's quite large then.
Yeah.
Is that large? I don't mean.
It's large for law school. For
Yeah, I was
graduate
going to
school,
say. Huh. And then obviously after that, is that when you went right into law, practicing right after you graduated Harvard Law?
Yeah, my goal was to be a law professor. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a professor and argue about how law was inherently unethical.
Wait. Why is law inherently unethical? In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, law pretends to be independent. It pretends to its objectivity. It pretends to these de-situationalized rules of behavior that are independent of the context of the people that are acting within the law and people who are imposing the rules of the law. But it can't function without that human subjectivity. And so you end up having this really schizophrenic mindset where you're trying to, and I'm not even talking on the practical level of all judges are biased. Even assuming, in legal theory, he's called Hercules, the ultimate objective judge who is never swayed by his subjectivity. Within the law, there's always built this like mens rea, the intent, and the very human aspects are built into the law, and you're trying to strip out the human situation. And so you always end up having this slightly split personality idea.
Yeah.
And this idea of creating rules that are independent of the situations, of the rule of law, it's it's inherently messed up. It means that you're not allowed to look at context. You're not allowed to look at what actually happened.
Right.
It means that somebody has to sit there in the abstract and think of rules of behavior that, murder is wrong.
Right.
And then you have to create exceptions. Well, if you're defending yourself, then it's not wrong. If you're doing it because the military says so, it's not wrong. And so you end up creating a rule and then exception rules, but you're never looking at, the actual human moment of, okay, murder is wrong, but what if I'm not in danger? What if somebody just killed my son and I go crazy? So you end up having these little release valves, like, insanity.
Right.
Innocent because of, or not guilty by virtue of insanity.
Yeah.
No.
Is that like temporary insanity?
Yeah, temporary insanity.
Yeah.
You'll never see Jeffrey Dahmer or some truly insane person get off because of temporary insanity. You'll only see people in understandable. When Bobbitt cut off her husband's penis because he was beating her, that was considered temporary insanity because it was an understandable type of insanity. You have true insanity, where somebody's really like a serial killer, they'll never get off for being insane.
Right.
So basically, the law does try to have these human release valves because fundamentally it is a human system that they're trying to, tell people how to interact with each other.
Right.
But those are kind of the fact that those release valves are necessary shows that the law it's fundamentally inhuman. It's flawed in a very it's a very inhuman action. And
yeah, like whenever I read like a legal document, almost it feels like I'm reading a mathematical thing with words. Like like different words literally have like plus minus definitions, almost like this or that, and then all encompassing of this. Like what I mean? Like I feel like I'm reading like once you kind of learn the mathematics of law, the legal readings and writing of it. You can kind of like you can start to decipher what they mean and what like a legal, like when you read a legal contract of some sort, like it's written in a weird kind of way.
Yeah, that law actually kind of, especially after dealing with artists for 10 years, I kind of missed the intellectual rigor of lawyers and of legalese in a sense, because there is a precision that I appreciate, but what bugs me is, like you introduced me as the anarchist lawyer. I think I would prefer to be, the reason I want to be a mammal. It boils down to I want to be a mammal. And we've created a society that is geared to the anarchist mammal, or just a mammal. And mammals are anarchist. Mammals are who's not anarchist is the ant. And we've created a society that's structured along insect lines.
It's true.
We function like an ant colony, and it's fundamentally in opposition to our biology as mammals. Mammals don't sit there and only think about the colony as a whole. They don't think about the specific role. I'm a lawyer. I'm a writer. I'm an accountant who knows Form 104B. And that's where we are. We have everybody with specialized tasks, living in very special. Everything about our structure is as a society, you couldn't have this level of density with a bunch of mammals. So we are extremely adaptable. So we've adapted to living like insects, like ants. But it's damaging to our souls. So what I'm looking for in life is precision in the soul. There's we need a bureau of the precision in the soul, like some government agency that unifies precision in the soul.
Well, and okay, but you kind of well, obviously it's beyond our. Yeah.
It's actually also stolen from Robert Musil, the man without qualities. But
okay.
Anyway. You're not fact checking me, so I can lie.
No, you said no laptops this episode, so that's fine. I don't even have my notebook with me, but because you've kind of like said like you are an anarchist, but and I'm sure most people when they hear the word anarchy, they're thinking chaos and like complete against everything that's organized or proper or whatever. But that's not how you really view anarchy at all. If you're even going to use that term, well, like how do you use the term anarchist?
Just to add to that, like when I said anarchy, when I kind of got familiar with the idea of anarchism, I said it to a few relatives, and the image that all of them had was the black-wearing dude that breaks windows.
Oh, no doubt. Most people who self-identify as anarchists are complete idiots.
Right. It's like everything
Yeah.
else, though. Like they use the
No,
badge.
but
they use the
particularly
label, but-
anarchist. I mean, I think anarchist attracts a particularly kind of reactive
Yeah.
mindset, and the rationales tend to be very simplistic. I
Right.
don't view anarchy as an endpoint. I view it as a vector. Or before I even go there, anarchy. I think that's a very, very important role for anarchism, and I think that law. We're just going back to what the law is. The benefit of the law. What most people listening to this who are pro-law would say, well, law is there to restrain power, and there is a restraining function for that. A truly just legal system will apply the same set of laws to those with power as it does to people without power.
Correct.
Now, that's taking aside from the fact that the people who draft the laws draft them in the first place to benefit them. So, they tend to be rich, fat, and so nudity will be illegal, but accumulating massive wealth, wealth we were protected. We end up people who draft the laws automatically draft favorable laws to them. But even that aside, the idea of law is you're supposed to have the same set of rules for those with power as without. The problem is that doesn't happen in real life because you have lobbyists, you have all these, when you have power, you can afford expensive lawyers, you can buy the legal system to some extent.
Right.
And the more people believe in the rule of law, the more those in power can break that fundamental positive aspect of law, which is restraining power, and they can start finding exceptions. Because you broke the law, it's the law becomes an ending argument. You say, it's the law, you weren't
label
wearing
as
your helmet,
criminal,
you weren't
that's it.
wearing your helmet on a bike, it's the law. Don't argue to me about why there's a good reason you're not wearing a helmet, it's the law. And that becomes the end of the argument. And when that works, then unjust laws that favor the rich, buying lobbyists, for example, a guy with an ounce of pot in the States will get years in jail, whereas, a huge bank doing money laundering, like HSBC, they'll get off scot-free. It just
That's
came out.
crazy.
And stuff
Yeah.
like that. And the more people trust in the law, the more that can happen. The more imbalance you can have, the less restraining of power you have. But the more people are skeptical of the law, the more anarchists you have out there, the more the law has to create this illusion of legitimacy. So it is an illusion, but it's an illusion that actually ends up becoming true as the system tries to prove how just it is. So the system is always, in order to avoid revolution, for example, the system will try to show that the law is just. The more it's seen as unjust, the bigger the chance of people going outside the law, using levers of power that are not controlled by the powerful, such as, in the 20s you had labor unions getting dangerous, and so people, workers want things like the weekend and 8-hour work days and child labor
weekend.
laws
Yeah.
and stuff like that, because people were scared that the powers that be were scared that people would go outside the legal framework.
Is that how weekends came to be?
Oh yeah,
Weekends came because of like
because of violent unions.
Really?
Not that I'm a fan of unions either, but the idea of being skeptical of the law as an entity forces it to legitimize itself, forces it to be actually more just. And so the more anarchists you have, the more people who are arguing that rule of law is not an automatic checkmate as an argument,
right.
the more the law has to show itself as being just, and the more the people in power are constrained by the law, and the more the law actually becomes just. So first of all, being an anarchist, it's like the conscience of the law. The anarchists are the conscience of the law because they keep it honest. That's one aspect. Second, we live in a society where I rode here on my motorbike, I had to get helmet head because I had to wear my helmet. It's nobody else is at risk from me not wearing my helmet. Only I am. And yet we have created a society where my neighbors can tell me, no, you can't wear your helmet. No, you can't bring your kid to a pub. All these rules that don't. The ideal law is one where my right to swing my fist ends at the tip of your nose. It should not be, and that kind of makes sense. There's a certain logic, and that's the philosophical underpinnings of a legal system. We've created a society where if I increase the actuarial risk of somehow swinging my fist around, might increase the chance of knocking a glass over and that glass will bump into your nose, or some air particles might touch your nose, that will be used as a justification for me not flailing my arms. And I can understand a legal system where I can't punch you in the nose. But one that says, if I ride my helmet, I might end up injuring myself, and then your wallet, your pocketbook will be impacted by rising healthcare costs. That argument can be used to control absolutely every behavior. Can't do jujitsu. That torn tendon, I had to go to the hospital. That's increasing your healthcare costs. Outlaw jujitsu, outlaw skydiving, outlaw any risky behavior. And it's always safety, safety, safety. Whether the arguments are valid or not, safety, Tacitus has this quote, the desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise. It's fundamentally anti-mammal. I can't take my son into a pub because it might be bad for his upbringing or something like that. He might be exposed
which
to...
alone is kind of a crazy thing. I mean, when they start saying you can't do this, and as long as you protect your child, then why can't he have that experience? Most pubs are quite safe. Most pubs are actually restaurants.
Well, I was tying this back into we were talking about Harvard. My roommate, my last year at Harvard, spent the first 12 years of her life in a pub in Ireland. She learned incredible human skills, just how to deal with people. She's currently the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
There you go.
She was a professor at Harvard. She ran she was Obama's foreign policy advisor until Samantha Power. She's a smart girl. She works extremely hard, but her biggest skill is human interaction.
Yeah.
And that's why she's the U.S. ambassador to the UN. She's a diplomat. And she learned those skills by growing up, not just visiting a pub with her dad, but she grew up in a pub.
Right.
And yes, there are lots of arguments against taking children to pubs too, but it should be up to the parents. Why do we have to have our neighbors? And that's all society is. It's a bunch of neighbors acting together.
Right.
It's not some god entity. It's a bunch of neighbors. Why should my neighbors tell me I need to wear my helmet on my bike, that I can't take my son to the pub, I have to wear a shirt, and if the pub doesn't want me wearing a shirt, fine. Anyway, my point is, I'm not looking for an end state anarchy. I see anarchy as a vector. Given where we are now, we're in such a controlled ant-like society that I want to push in the direction of anarchy. It doesn't mean I ever want to get there. I don't believe in utopias. I don't believe in stable endpoints. And I don't believe in group identities. I think individuals, since we're mammals, each individual has, for lack of a better word, a soul. Each individual has the ability to respond. They can take responsibility for an action. But as soon as you have a collective, whether it's a union or a corporation or a government, these collectives, the entire purpose of them is to diffuse responsibility. It's to not take responsibility. There's no person able to make a decision, no person say, that's my fault. Yeah. I screwed up.
So what's the big danger with that then?
Well, the big danger is we live these really sorry.
It's okay.
Anarchy.
Yeah. We live these lives that are at odds with our biology. And we're constantly feel powerless. And part of it, living in Bali's not anarchy, but all my problems there, whenever there was an issue, it was a person. If the cops tried to stop me for not wearing a helmet, there was a law against helmets, I would take off. They would chase me. They would only chase you sometimes.
Sometimes they wouldn't even chase you.
Sometimes they wouldn't chase you. Sometimes they wouldn't catch you when they chased you. And if they caught you, there was no additional penalty for taking off on a police officer. That wasn't a crime. It wasn't bad. And the cop felt really good about having caught you. And he felt like it was a good macho feeling for him. And it was
exciting.
Yeah, it was exciting. And the fine was still the same. And we were always in a good mood. We were always joking and laughing. It was, you caught me. You were faster today. And it was good-natured, one-on-one.
But isn't there a risk for, an accident of some sort because of this high-speed chase?
There is. Of course, a more authentic life is riskier. Yeah. But the thing was, it was one-on-one. That money went into his pocket. He was a corrupt cop. It didn't go into some system. It didn't go into a computer that would keep track of my traffic failure for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
When a neighbor did something like burning plastic, you collect from 12 hotels and, poison my air, I would go and complain at him, and we would have an argument, and it was one-on-one. It was a human interaction. And I didn't find myself, I found myself thinking about coconuts and cars and tangible problems that were like coconuts falling on your head. I didn't think about philosophy. I didn't think about authentic lives or not. But you come to North America, and it's not that cop's fault. He's the long arm of the law, and that it's spread out among 1,000 politicians and 30 million people voting him or refusing to vote. And everything's spread out. It's a system, and there's no way to fight back. There's no way to deal with your problems the way that we grew up on the savannah dealing with our problems. Somebody did something to you, talked to them, or you fought them, or...
So when did all this start, though? Is that from the whole times of the ancient Greeks, when they started to create these kind of political models and systems and philosophies and stuff like that? Is that where you see this kind of civilization pattern originating?
I blame agriculture.
What's that?
I blame agriculture.
You blame agriculture?
I think agriculture was the biggest human mistake ever.
That's what they said in Sex at Dawn.
Right. That's why his name's Christopher Ryan is the author, and he wrote this book, Sex at Dawn, talking about monogamy and polygamy and all that kind of stuff, and he blames agriculture as well. And his second book he's coming out, which you'll probably really enjoy the title, is called Regulated to Death.
Yeah.
So he seems really right up your alley, actually. And I don't think it's out yet, but that's basically the argument he's making in agriculture, is that once you start to section off, because before agriculture is hunter-gathering, sharing, all that kind of stuff, and you would share things, right? But once you start plotting up, this is now my land, I have to defend my land, I need sons to work my land, and that's what kind of created that whole...
And you have surplus, which allows all these great things we built, but also allows accumulation of wealth, specialization. So some people end up getting power, other people don't. And again, I'm not a utopian guy. I'm not a communist. I don't want everybody to have the same. I'm a big believer in people battling it out. And I believe in inequality, not inequality of opportunity, but inequality of result. When you and I wrestle, somebody's going to tap somebody.
Right.
And that's all good. Next time it will be the other way around. Now, I'm not saying in an anarchist system will always come some kind of good solution. I'm saying I'm not offering solutions. I'm offering critiques. And I think that is a valid perspective to offer critiques, because one of my favorite signs I've ever seen in a protest was in Japan, and the guy had just had a sign saying, "We need to complain more." And that was a sign. I was like, yes, that's fantastic. People do need to fight back, and it doesn't matter.
I think people complain a lot, but the things they complain about right now,
passive-aggressive way,
the things they complain about are not relevant at all.
I think people don't complain that much because it's actually a pretty comfortable life that we live here, and most people are very satisfied with.
I guess we're coming from a service industry perspective, so that's why I was saying that. But in general, you're probably right.
No, people do. I mean, and it's difficult. Like, I've never been in a city with as bad drivers as Vancouver. I've lived in 12 countries.
It is brutal.
Traveled to about 65. Lived in a lot of different cities in those countries. I've never seen a city with drivers as bad as Vancouver. But if I honk at somebody, and there are different honks. There's the laying on the horn. There's a honk. I'm here. There's a light screen. You can go. People have thrown apples at me. People have freak out. And in Bali, I really enjoyed it. I'd be passing around a blind corner, and somebody would be coming the other way, and they'd move out of the way a little bit. The person I was passing moved out of the way a little bit. And the closer we came to actually getting in a head-on collision, the bigger smile we would give to each other. Because it kind of diffused the stress of like, oh, we almost killed each other. And
that's the same in Iran too.
Yeah.
I'm from Iran, and that's
and I did that when I first came to Vancouver. I was in somebody's lane, and I gave him a big smile. And the guy was okay with me until I smiled at him. As soon as I smiled at him, if he had a gun, he would have shot me.
Yeah.
That's the one thing
totally lost
I've taken from my traveling and stuff too, especially in Asian countries where, there's not really any lines on the roads. Roads operate much more like river systems, and they flow like salmon or whatever, right? And so when I'm driving here, oftentimes I have no problems going over the yellow line to get around someone because this is, if you see the whole lane's free, there's nothing coming, but people will like, no, I cannot leave my line. You know,
and that's scary. It's like they think they're driving a train.
Yeah.
And we create, you know, driving is a skill. It's like swimming.
Yeah.
But we have basically decided to let the people who dog paddle make the rules.
It's true.
And that is, like, if you're going to have an anarchy, you do need a level of education and empathy, and I totally get it. That
critical thinking.
Critical thinking and the ability to make that decision of, can I cross the yellow line right now because there's no car coming, or can I not?
Yeah.
And the law as a system cannot, let's come back to situationality, that's what I was trying to say. The law cannot distinguish whether you can cross that line because there's no traffic coming, or there is traffic coming and you shouldn't cross that line. Because it has to be codified ex ante. It has to be codified before the event happens. So you create a law saying you cannot cross the yellow line. And then because of that law, you create societies where people will act, I mean, like ants.
It changes,
and they will just
the whole
stop.
behavior.
And there's a car that's slightly parked and it will require to move 2 feet over the yellow line. There's no car coming. And they will physically stop. And that drives me bonkers. It seems so, it takes away everything that makes humans special. It makes us divine. Like the ability to free will, the reason, you know, we ate the apple of knowledge. Thank God for Eve and the devil. We actually took that knowledge. We got out of the Garden of Eden. We are able to make decisions on our own. We have free will. And yet people want to abdicate it. People want to vote it away. People want more rules to prevent those few people who will still think on their own.
Yeah.
And the police, I have a lot of police friends, and they tend to be exactly the type of people that I like, because they like to think on their own. That's why I became cops. But then they see the world as wolf and sheep. And they're the ones protecting the sheep. They're cops here, not in Czechoslovakia or you know, a lot of third world countries, but the cops here, by and large, they actually want to do good things. But they do it by separating predators and prey, wolf and sheep. And so if you don't act like a sheep, you must be a wolf. And so you're dangerous.
Right.
And the reason I like cops one-on-one is because they're often wolf-type personalities. But they're just doing good. They're not sheep. They don't tend to, there are people who, I got a ticket at Wreck Beach for drinking a beer.
How did that make you feel? That's disheartening.
It's disheartening, it's scary,
Yeah, it's just like, really? I mean, that's one thing I really, if I could change not any law, but, you know, in terms of like just personal liberties and stuff like that, let me have a beer at the beach during sunset. That's probably one of the most beautiful things you could do as an adult, a human, if you're into that stuff. If you're into just, you know, chilling back and having a glass of beer.
I was on a date. We both
sunset.
we had 2 beers,
Why
2
not?
people, and of course only I got the beer because there's still that human element. And the cop, you know, he's not going to give
Both
a ticket to the pretty girl. He's going to give it to the big guy who looks like he could be a wolf. Who looks threatening, even though he's, I mean, it was less threatening than a naked man. You know, well, maybe.
Were you naked at the time?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Of course. Wreck Beach, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm thinking about now, that according to your view, it's really important that how people are grown up, because you know, when I think about different professions, like a pilot, nobody would let a pilot you know, take in charge of an airplane without having proper education. Nobody would let any doctor do a surgery without proper education. But in our society, anyone can have children, and which is, I'm not saying we should restrict people and not to have children, but they don't know how to raise.
They can drive,
children.
but they don't know how to drive.
Right.
Like,
and I see a lot of examples when I'm in the SkyTrain or wherever I am. I see incredibly bad parenting.
Yeah.
And that's the most important years of somebody's life, and the childhood traumas and all the conflicts that they see, or you know, just the fact that the parents don't teach them enough. You know, all of these things go hand in hand, and then you have like a lot of people who don't function properly in the society. And
I agree with you there, and that's why I'm not trying to come up with some kind of, you know, solution. I'm coming up with criticisms.
Right.
And look, I think going back to biology, I think it's Desmond Morris talked about how we evolved to live in tribes of about 200, maximum 200 people, where you could recognize each other by face.
Yeah.
And once you get above that, and you start having, and at that point, with a tribe of 200, you elect somebody as the leader, and he's screwing up. He has to look at you in the face and
Right.
answer for that.
That's
on a
huge
regular
point.
basis.
That's a great point.
Harper never has to look me in the face.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He doesn't look anybody in the face.
I saw the thing you posted the other day. Obama called him a big lump or something like that.
Yeah.
What was that all about? It was just. What was it just?
Not just a lumpy guy.
No, I heard.
He kind of is a lumpy guy.
He is kind of a lumpy guy. I read that too. I think it was something like
just called him a
it was
lump.
off camera or something like that, but it got recorded or something.
It's actually a satire paper, but I don't.
Oh.
It kind of ruins the satire to say it's satire. But
Okay.
Yeah.
all good satire has its roots in truth, right?
Yeah.
So
No, that's a good point though, that they don't have to look you in the face, and like that group, and having a small population like that obviously can do that. But I mean, that's the point I was trying to get to. So I mean, how many people do you see a day? Different people that you've never seen before, and you'll probably never see again. It happens all the time, and that really kind of trips me out sometimes. I'll be standing online, I'll just looking at different people, and like you just see, I've never seen that human being before, and I'll probably never see him again.
if you look at game theory, prisoner's dilemma, the correct solution for prisoner's dilemma is completely opposite if it's a one-off game versus if you're going to play the game over and over. You know the prisoner's dilemma, right?
No.
You have
The
two
prisoner's dilemma?
Yeah, two criminals are caught by the cops, and they're told if you tell on your buddy, you get to go free. If you don't if he tells on you first, he gets to go free. And if you know that you're only going to be in that situation with your fellow criminal one time, everybody tells. It's the logical thing to do is to tell. If you know you're going to be playing that game over and over, it's much more logical to not tell. And so that's why you have like organized crime networks like the mafia will often not tell, whereas one-off criminals will. But more fundamentally, if you apply that to human interactions, you see this in highly touristed environments. Bali for that matter. When people deal with tourists, they know that those people are never going to come back to their shop.
Yeah.
Whether it's a restaurant that sells you tainted food or whatever it is, bad service. If you're never going to, if it's a one-off transaction, there's no reason to treat the person like a human being. It's a quick, get the money, crappy service, get out. Once you have repeat interactions, then you have to act more like a human being to the other person.
Yeah.
And the larger the society, the less we have to act,
everything.
the less human we
That's
have to
something
act.
that always kind of bums me out when I go traveling, say to like Bangkok in Thailand, especially on like Koh San Road, the main expat area, crazy backpacking, and for them, like you go there for, myself, I'll be there for maybe 2 or 3 nights max before I get the hell out of there, and you got to get out of there. It's just like it's awful, but for them, they're there every single day. The people like the tourist merchants and stuff like that. And you can just see it. They're like completely disheartened. It's really sad. Like I hate seeing how they are with people. They're so jaded. They're the most extremely jaded people because they're dealing with drunken tourists every single day. And they look at, when they see us, that's all they see. It's just like, oh, here's another. Maybe I can get some money out of them. But they just it just seems like such a. I don't know. I see it. You can just see how through their behavior and how they act to you.
Tourism is such a destructive force. It's an extremely inauthentic life. I spent 16 months backpacking around Asia, and I spent a year traveling around Africa. I spent a good chunk of my life as a tourist.
Yeah.
And it's a really, after a while, I had this feeling I was a stone skipping on the water. And I couldn't sink in anywhere. And I was having, it's like when you first start online dating. After a while, you just want to put the 10 questions on your forehead and said, please don't ask me these fucking questions again. And it's the same thing when you're a tourist and you're traveling around and you feel like you're, seeing all this beauty and stuff, and it's crap. It's an illusion that's being sold to you in most places that you're traveling. And your interactions, when you first start traveling, you think you've had these great experiences. And some are authentic, I'm sure, but an awful lot of them are not.
Yeah. Well, and it's unfortunately because we kind of live in a day and age where, we can go, like you're able to go all over Asia and Africa within the span of 2.5 years, where 200 years ago, that would take 20 years to do what you did. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a double-edged sword where, you get to go and see tons of things within your lifetime, within a very small amount of period, relatively cheap and easy and simply. But, it's kind of, arguably watered down. And I'm sure you purposely went out of your way to go off the beaten trail a little bit, which, I personally try to do as well. But
I tried.
I
went a month in Africa without seeing another white person, but still it was tough because to them I was still a white person, and it's they're not going to see me the same way. I'll never see how they interact with each other, and it's just shallow. I guess you can only have a shallow experience as a tourist. Even living in I lived in Bali for 6 years, and it basically took that long before I really started. I think were true Balinese friendships. I knew some really great people, but I go to Kuta, and I'd go through the whole tourist experience all over again.
Yeah.
And it's tough because you want to see the road, you want to see the difference, and in the process you're erasing those differences.
Yeah, that's true.
And I kind of fear for my sons,
what's it going to be like 100 years from now?
Anything that's
anything
different.
that's authentic and
different. We're flattening the road so quickly.
Yeah, culturally things are kind of, they're just
melting pot.
Yeah, they're melting away. Is exactly it. They're just being meshed together, and globalization's happening, and Koreans are getting plastic surgery to look like Caucasians, and Filipinos are whiting.
What's funny about Koreans is that you ever see them get on an airplane? I love seeing Korean get out of an airplane. I love seeing.
I've never seen it.
If you're ever not in Korea, but go to like Bali or any place where Koreans go to travel, and just go and watch like Korean Airlines land. It's a great experience because they all the couples come off wearing exactly matching clothing. They're identical clothing. It's really kind of fun. And it's not like one or two couples. It's like every single couple on the plane will have, this shirt, they would somehow find a second shirt in a female size.
Why do they do
both,
that?
That shirt, I guess they want to show that they're a unit or something. I don't know why. I just enjoy the aesthetic experience. It's like doing drugs. I don't do drugs. I go and sit and watch Koreans get off airplanes.
I wanted to, the timing of this, one thing that we actually wanted to talk to you about, which I kind of alluded to before the podcast, was tapping into your current affairs knowledge a little bit with Ukraine. And actually the timing of this conversation is pretty, I guess more potent just because of the incident that happened yesterday with the Malaysian airline being shot down.
See, when you told me you were going to talk about Ukraine, I thought...
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask one question before we get to that?
For sure.
Because we were talking about politics and all that.
Let's keep this train rolling.
Yeah.
There's no rules.
I noticed
especially
that
on
you
this
said,
episode.
When you were saying, I'm not offering a solution, I'm just criticizing, and you said, I don't believe in utopia, I'm not a communist. So do you think that
it's
communist? Communist.
Okay.
Do you think that it's really, because one of the things that I'm seeing, a pattern that I'm seeing in people's thinking, and I really think it's wrong, is polarizing every subject, like Democrats vs Republicans, or I don't know. It happens in a lot of ideas, and this whole capitalism versus communism, socialism is a thing now that everybody talks about these two as the only alternatives. But I wanted to ask if you have looked into solutions like resource-based economy that, for instance, the Venus Project has put forward. I'm not a big fan of them. I'm just saying that there are some solutions being put forward. But have you looked into them, and what do you think of them?
Well, again, I don't really believe in solutions. I believe in problems. Mm-hmm. And I use communism because it's a particularly glaring example of somebody who came up with a solution. Marx's critique of capitalism is fantastic. The fetishization of objects, the idolatry.
Yeah.
So long as Marx is criticizing, He's brilliant. As soon as he starts coming up with positive prescriptions of what kind of utopia to create, his solutions caused tens of millions of deaths.
But not
through
the
Soviet Union.
solutions, the execution of the people who
But that,
put
my,
them
point,
in the...
my argument would be that all executions of solutions will end up executing people.
But what is the cause of that, though? Isn't it the
it's an abstracted approach to life. You come up with a solution ahead of time and try to impose it on people, and then I gotta turn this off. If you come up with oh my God, technology. Damn agriculture.
Okay.
See, this is the result of agriculture. No, with communism, it's a particularly glaring example of and yeah, people will talk about, oh, Lenin did it wrong, Stalin, made it worse, and all this. But I think there are examples over and over through history. If you look at a broad picture of history, if you come up with a prescription and you try to impose the reason capitalism won, in a sense, in the battle over communism was at least it was flexible in a sense of it left stuff up to individual people. It didn't try to impose its capitalist prescriptions as much. Now you have the people on the right in the Tea Party treating the Constitution as a Bible, and their way of talking is almost communistic in terms of how much they're embracing the ideology of capitalism. But the reason capitalism won was not the ideologues of capitalism, it's the people selling and buying shit and just doing their business and responding to customers and that kind of non-controlled from the top behavior, I think, is the reason that capitalism historically kind of
because it gave them more individual choice at
it gave more
personal
individual
level.
Yeah.
Like I can go and start a spoon business.
Now we're getting away from capitalism. What we have in the States with corporations becoming persons and stuff like that.
Right.
To me, a corporation is no different. Like just coming back to this idea of opposites. I from time to time write for a magazine called Liberty Magazine. It was started in the 50s as a fusion of libertarian, which was traditionally considered right wing, and anarchist, which was traditionally left wing. Is that an anarchist and a libertarian started this magazine. And the idea was that the political spectrum is kind of a circle, and at the extremes, the left and right kind of meet up. And so I wrote from time to time, and the anarchist guy died, and the founder died, and it was taken over by a kind of pure libertarian, but not a Tea Party guy. The guy is a Blake scholar. He's got a PhD in Blake. He's a very, very intelligent man, and he still, even though most of the readership has gone libertarian, he'll still publish my more anarchist stuff. And it's funny because if I have to choose, I self-identify as a liberal. If I have to choose between conservative and liberal, I'll avoid the conservative label no matter what. But I've often been called extremely right-wing. Right. I'm more often called extremely left, but I've also been called extremely right because of certain specific views. And so these categories, like people do end up gaining their identity from categories. And that again, I think it's kind of it's an abstracted way of living. They'll be categorized in their own head as a Republican, and then they start towing the Republican line. Right. And to me, that's again an abstracted way of living. It's not coming from your own personal experience in life and your history and your values. It's coming from wanting to identify with a group.
Right.
And I dislike groups. So you guys laugh and I say I'm no fan of unions. Given the current power balance between corporations and unions, I'll side with the unions because the corporations are the 800-pound gorilla, and so if there's a 400-pound gorilla willing to fight the 800-pound gorilla, I'll take the side of the 400-pound gorilla, but it's still the gorilla. And it's just an individual now, it weighs about 70 pounds and has no power. Right. So you end up having to take sides with the gorillas. But for me, it's fundamentally, group identities are dangerous. I don't care if it's skin color or sexual orientation or gender or nationality or politics.
The
or
example
ideology.
that I gave as resource-based economy, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's something that never is being talked about in the system because it's not based on money, it's based on resource, how to manage resources. And it argues that we have enough technological understanding, medical understanding, everything to make the whole global system function in a really good way and provide for everybody a good life.
Is it still a capitalistic-based
there is no money in it. So it's at the end of the at the end
So
of
how
the
do you
film
decide what you
Zeitgeist,
want to
right?
do, though? You know, like
Well,
if I was
there's a huge book like
well,
this.
you got to go and, you know, you're going to be a solar panel repairman.
Well, the first thing in it is actually, this is the most important thing about it. Most of the jobs in today's world are unnecessary. Most of the jobs in this world are unnecessary, are based on, an example would be planned obsolescence. So they design things to go obsolete so that they make a new version the next year so that you go buy the next version. So you have all these factories running every year. So it's not based on making that one perfect thing for you.
I haven't read enough about resource-based economy to criticize it properly, but I'm sure I'll be criticizing it.
And I can't really talk about it here. As I said, there is a huge book on it. But I think you've heard about it in Zeitgeist movie. If you've seen Zeitgeist, the third one, they moving forward, kind of offers it as a solution, not the perfect. They say it too. They say like, we are just putting forward an alternative because nobody is talking about an alternative. It's only communism, capitalism, always polarized kind of thinking.
The one thing I want to add about capitalism, though, again, is if you read Adam Smith, the fundamental assumption, because my undergrad was economics, and the fundamental assumption of capitalist markets is atomistic markets, which means no single player can impact price or anything about the market. Now, Adam Smith's entire premise of capitalism was based on this idea that laissez-faire and capitalism only works with atomistic markets. It does not work with monopolies. Now, you know, how many cell phone providers do we have?
Yeah.
Can Bell impact the price? Of course they can. We don't have atomistic markets. We don't have anything resembling capitalist principles. In trade theory, Ricardian trade theory makes perfect logical sense. Comparative advantage, you sell what you make cheaply. If you have guns and butter, whoever makes the cheap butter makes all butter, and he sells half his butter to the guy who makes guns, and that guy sells half his guns, and everybody benefits. There are benefits from trade for everybody. If you actually look at the numbers of international trade numbers, the only country that has ever showed Ricardian trade patterns was Japan, and that's only because they imported all their oil, and so the numbers ended up reflecting slightly. By and large, what we have is one country will buy and sell cars, buy and sell TV sets. They'll produce the same things that they're buying, and all of these. But when you talk to people about the benefits of trade, they will always give you economic theory based on Ricardian comparative advantage theory. And the real world does not work like that at all. And we have this over and over and over again where people have theories, beautiful theories, and they'll start living based on these theories. And I guess what I'm arguing against is not to live based on preconceived theories, to kind of, again, live in a more immediate, direct way. And I guess what bothers me is the hypocrisy, the bait and switch idea that you are justifying your trade deal based on economic theories that look beautiful and logical on paper and are just not the way the world works. Same thing with capitalism. Americans keep claiming, we're capitalists. The right keeps claiming capitalism. There's nothing resembling capitalism in North America right now, because of the size of these corporations, these group identities. And again, the Tea Party will say, keep the government out of my business, and corporations have the right to like Hobby Lobby. Corporations have religious rights. Yeah. Like, what creates corporations? Corporations are not partnerships, but people have a lack of legal and economic understanding. They pretend that corporations are just a bunch of people with freedom of association. That's the argument that Tea Party will. I have a Tea Party politician as a friend that I fight with all the time. He from Nevada, and he was too right-wing for the Nevada Tea Party. But anyway, he keeps talking about how it's freedom of association and the government should stay out of it. A partnership would be freedom of association. A corporation is created by government fiat. If you look at the earliest corporations like Hudson's Bay Company, they were basically given they were given the rights to become a corporation by the crown, by the king. And the whole idea was that you would limit your liability by the power of the king. The power of the king was used to limit the ability of people to sue you, the shareholders. Corporations are created by the government. The corporation is a government entity. It's government fiat. And yet people on the right who claim that they're libertarian will sit there and fight for the rights of corporations as though they were fighting for individuals. And these are still group identities.
Would our society today, if let's say a corporation couldn't exist how it does now, what would things look like then? Would it be like, is it just too many people right now to have it be otherwise? Like, would you just have this crazy kind of mass individual partnership market of small and medium-sized business or something? Like, what
Well, I think
would that even look like?
In terms of like actual practical solutions, you can jump to an anarchist system or completely undo.
Right. Yeah.
But you can take size into account, and I think you should. I think that first of all, you should undo the legitimacy of arguments that pretend that regulating corporations is the same as regulating people. If we are stuck with corporations, which I don't necessarily think we have to be stuck with them, but if we are stuck with them, we have to acknowledge that the judicial branch is an aspect of the government. The corporate law is is a type of law. It's an aspect of government power, and having government regulate corporations, at least get these two monsters fighting each other. Get government to limit corporations. Now, my libertarian friends think it's crazy. I call myself an anarchist and I argue for more regulation, but it's not more regulation of individuals. It's more regulation of other groups that are dangerous to individuals. Because you have to start at a point where we are, and we are at a point where we are an incredibly complex system, very dense. With you just can't suddenly say, okay, no more laws. You can't just jump there overnight. That's the Hobbesian nightmare that everybody peddles when they think of anarchists. They think smashing windows after winning a hockey game.
Right.
To start unraveling some of this group control and get more and more individual behavior, it ironically might start with something like more government regulation of corporations. And Germany has a law that corporations with over 1,000 employees have a different set of laws than corporations with fewer than 1,000 employees. Now with Obamacare, they're going to have corporations over 50 employees have to provide health care. So there is precedent for the larger the corporation, the more it should be regulated. But the first step is to undo some of this liberty language that the right has claimed and is using just to protect entrenched power. Because basically the right wing in America has totally claimed the language of liberty and individual liberty and turned it to a tool for empowering those who already have power. So the first step is to delegitimize those arguments and then start limiting corporations. And I think that if you actually went one step further and got rid of corporate personhood, I think that would be a massive upheaval in terms of the economic structures. I think you'd end up with a much better world. But yeah, you would lose the Walmarts of the world. You would lose the huge corporations, and it would be economic chaos in the transition period. Absolutely, there would be.
How long that could last? Years.
I don't think it would ever get passed, to be realistic, because those people have too much power. They would prevent anybody from passing a law like that. But you could go gradually towards there to make it. You can shift incentives gradually. So you make it more and more of a disincentive to get that big.
Right.
And you make them pay more taxes if they're that big. You impose more regulations if they're that big. And you gradually, you just, on the margin, you shift more and more benefits towards small mom and pop shops, towards partnerships where it's, a partnership can work up to, it doesn't have to be 2 or 3 people.
No.
The law firm I worked for was a partnership of 2,500 lawyers. It was unwieldy. That's about the max, because law firms can't be corporations. They have to be partnerships.
Okay.
And that was, the reason I was the world's biggest law firm at the time was because, and even it was a basket case, trying to manage those 2,500 lawyers.
Were all partners?
Well, no, 500 were partners, so it's even less. 500 voting partners. They had several tiers of partnerships. But the highest tier, the senior partners, there were 500. And having a partner meeting once a year and making decisions, it was a bit of a nightmare.
Sure.
So that's about the maximum feasible size for a company, would be about 500 partners and maybe 2,000 employees, like that law firm.
Yes.
But the benefits would be on a human level. They would not be on an economic level.
Right.
Economically, the economic system we have is because it cranks out a lot of shit. Yeah. And it pays a lot of salaries and,
supports
it supports population. It supports it in a very differentiated way. It supports some people much more better than it supports other people. And it's getting more and more. If you look at social mobility in the U.S., it's getting ridiculously low. It's much lower than in Europe, for example. you also have
U.S. is lower than Europe
lower.
now?
They have this idea of land of opportunity, but social mobility in the U.S. has been lower for a long time. Because education and healthcare and all that stuff goes with your income, right? So if the poor people can't afford healthcare, they can't afford schools, they're never going to rise out in terms of opportunity.
Right.
And now where the level of wealth entrenchment at the top, we're starting to get the estate tax was gotten rid of. I think it was like 10, 15 years ago they got rid of the estate tax, and so now we're getting more and more this new generation of people with inherited wealth. And you are getting, it's a new Gilded Age. You are getting a new era of financial nobility where people, they just live in a different world. And I'm cynical. I don't think that it's possible to undo that. I mean, we can talk in abstract terms, theoretical terms. What would happen if we took away corporate personhood? Not just corporate personhood, the idea, the ability to incorporate. I think the biggest single, I hate offering solutions, but the biggest single positive impact you could ever have would be take away the idea of a corporation. I mean, I have a corporation, but I don't think it's hypocritical. That's the
You gotta play.
You play by the rules that are there. But
yeah.
just like Warren Buffett, he's very wealthy. He pays less, but he says it's ridiculous that I pay a lower tax rate than my secretary.
Yeah.
And I think if you took away corporations and the right to create this legal fiction, if you took away that legal fiction, you would change the world. There wouldn't be strip malls anymore. There would be mom and pop shops. People would actually talk to each other more. We'd have a much more human world. So it doesn't require, I'm not an anarchist in the sense of let's throw bricks through the window.
Yeah,
every time you attack the system, every time you attack the empire, you make it stronger. All those assholes who broke windows, all they did was strengthen the police state.
Yeah.
Every time, because there's no chance of winning. There's no chance of actually revolution. And so every attack becomes a justification. Look what happened after September 11th.
Right.
America was already in that direction, but that attack enabled the police state to kind of completely go crazy. It didn't do any harm to the police state. They loved it. So if you're a true anarchist, you will never break a window.
Right.
Because every time you attack physically, you are basically undermining everything that you claim that you're supporting.
Right.
So that kind of, and I'm not saying I'm against violence. I think that there's a time and place for violence. Like we would come back to the weekend. The reason that that the workers got the weekend is because they were negotiating in the shadow of potential violence. The state knew that if they didn't give those workers the weekend, there were going to be riots. They saw the revolution, in the Soviet Union or in Russia. They saw upheaval all through Europe, and they knew if they didn't give back to the workers, there might be the same type of revolution occurring in Canada.
So at that time, did people just work every single day?
Yeah, there were no limits.
Up until when? When did this kind of come around?
36 was, I believe, when the Supreme Court in the U.S. Up until then, all kind of regulations of
other than like spirit,
I believe it was
like
36.
religious holidays were only like the days that people didn't
Well,
work
it
and
was
stuff?
just up to the employer.
Oh, okay.
And any law controlling employer-employee relationships was considered unconstitutional, that the government didn't have the power. And then I think, it's a few years back now, but I think it was 36, there was a case where the Supreme Court changed and they decided that the Commerce Clause actually upholds. And they stretched, the Commerce Clause, the right is right in the sense of the right to regulate interstate commerce was used to justify absolutely every law. It was a huge intellectual stretch. And on a purely intellectual academic level, I agree with the right. It's ridiculous that you can have a law saying you can't bring a gun to school because it might impact the interstate sale of guns. And that's how they would have to justify their laws. It's these convoluted arguments because they see us as a country of laws. And so instead of saying, no, this just doesn't make any sense, they had to say, oh, we're going to tie it onto this power called the Commerce Clause.
Right.
But anyway, the benefit of violence, the power of violence is real and it's important, but it only works until it's used. As soon as you use it, you kind of lose it. And so I guess ideally you'll have violence in the country next door. Let your people in power see that this is a potential threat, and then you never actually have to use violence.
Didn't
And
you saw
again-
that in Egypt and other countries that had like big revolutions lately? Do you think that would be an example of something like that, or?
Well, those countries were so fragile. I mean, they were basket cases, so they were so fragile that the revolution could just take over.
Right.
That will never happen in the States or in Canada. And so I think here using violence would just be totally counterproductive.
So when you were seeing Occupy movement happening, you knew from the beginning that it wouldn't do any good.
Yeah, I was cynical. I like the Occupy movement because they forced the cops to be violent. You know, they weren't the violent ones.
Yeah.
They forced the cops to be violent, and whoever it's kind of true in regular life too. Whoever swings first loses.
Right.
You know, the minute you punch somebody, you've lost.
Right.
And in a sense, getting that the Occupy movement, all those shots of the tear gas for no reason and stuff like that.
Right. It makes them look like the bad
makes
guys.
them look, and then it forces again. The law loves to legitimize itself. It really wants to look legitimate, and the more skeptical people become of the law, the more it has to act to actually be more legitimate. So showing abuse of power actually forces the police department to impose new rules on their cops.
So it kind of created an awareness in people.
Yeah,
figuring out.
I think the
something is
Occupy
wrong
movement
here.
did good. I
Yeah.
mean, I think I don't think they had a chance of making huge change, but they did some positive changes at the margin.
It was a step.
It was a step, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was sad to see how quickly it fizzled out.
Yeah,
I was
I
hoping
know.
they could tough it out a
same.
little longer.
I was pretty excited about
yeah.
it. Like, and seeing it happening in Europe too, right away. It was
Yeah.
happening in Spain. It was
It's
happening in
happening
Italy.
here at the art gallery. I mean,
Right.
they were plunked out there for not long, I guess, technically,
Couple
but
weeks maybe.
maybe it was closer to a month, I think.
I
but-
didn't really like the idea of actually occupying a place and putting tents on, but if it was a constant thing that you go every day
Yeah.
or even every weekend, I think it would have a much bigger impact, because as soon as you put the tents on and go in
Gives them
there,
the
it
reason
would
to get rid of you.
become a hippie kind of movement, and they did that too here.
Mm-hmm.
They said, look at these people taking drugs and just having fun, just thinking that it's fun. And
I like that they were breaking the rules. I like that they were breaking the law. And you kind of need those tents to break the law. I was in the RNC protest, the Republican convention in New York in 2004. And I was in that march, and I was kind of participating in that to some extent. And they initially wanted to have the protest in Central Park. And the government said, oh no, you can't protest in Central Park because it's bad for the grass. And so they said, okay. And the Libertarian Party in the US had the best, this is before the Tea Party when they were still more honest. The Libertarian Party had the best slogan. They said, if you ask the government for permission to protest it, you deserve to be told no.
yeah.
And people, they had asked for the right to protest in Central Park. They were told no. And so then they went, and they went along this convoluted route where they were told to go, blocks and blocks away from the actual convention. And that to me was a very flaccid
Yeah,
protest.
it
Like that
seems-
did nothing.
Seems kind of against the whole spirit of what it should be if you're going to go and ask permission.
Yeah.
Hey, it's okay if we go and protest here. You got to
Yeah.
just kind of go and do it. It's going to have.
I'm not suggesting breaking windows, but I'm suggesting
but
that
you
the whole point is you have to kind of, the civil disobedience, there has to be a disobedience element to it. You
Right.
can't just, passively take
Right.
everything and,
Yeah.
Well, when you want to move on to the next subject, can you come a little closer so you can
Okay.
be in that shot, and I
Oh, yeah.
leave you guys for 2 minutes?
Yeah, go ahead. It's all good. We got
there
it.
you go.
We'll keep it on the big screen
Yeah.
where we go. But let's get into Ukraine then, because the cool thing was Andy and I, we've been saying this for a long time now. It's like, oh, Alex keeps kind of posting and mentioning things about Ukraine on Facebook and stuff like that, and so we knew that you were kind of on top of it. And what you do with a lot of current affairs, you kind of you stay abreast with it. I don't really know your tactics, but you always are. You got your resources. But this is one that you
You are
kind
my
of-
resource.
Yeah,
I
you
go
are
on
my-
Facebook. I'm like, okay, what's Boldizar posting? Okay, that's my news for today. Perfect.
So, but you've been kind of following the whole Ukraine. What do you even want to call it? What is it called? What's happening?
well, when you told me we were going to talk about Ukraine, I thought we were going to talk mail order brides and
well, we can.
I know you
Next
guys are Ukraine.
podcast.
No, but Ukraine's fascinating because until about a year ago, that was, if you thought of Ukraine, you thought of mail order brides and maybe, phosphorescent vulvas from Chernobyl or whatever.
Right.
Because the mail order brides glowed in the dark.
Yeah.
But But a year ago, with the whole Maidan and stuff, it was really impressive. It was, to me, it was fascinating to see people rise up spontaneously.
What were they rising up against?
Yeah, what was the whole beginning?
Well,
what happened?
The specific details was Yanukovych, the former president, had promised to sign an association agreement with Europe, with the European Union, just a trade deal, not membership in the EU or NATO or anything, just a trade agreement. Russia was trying to create its own Eurasian trade union with Belarus and Kazakhstan, and they basically bribed Yanukovych to say no to the European deal.
They bribed him like financially somehow?
Yeah.
Really?
No, they offered, not just him, but also Ukraine, but he was basically becoming more and more of a puppet of Putin. And but the people rose up. It wasn't specifically just against the broken promise of the trade deal. I think that Ukrainians want to see themselves as European, and they saw Ukraine moving towards Russia. They saw it moving towards the corruption and cronyism that had taken over Ukraine ever since, with the Orange Revolution. They thought they were getting away from that, and then it started going back there. And so it wasn't really a protest just against the European trade deal. It was against the whole kind of cronyism and corruption that had taken over their entire political system. And so it really was this beautiful example of people rising up against.
And was it a pretty
government?
Was the people rising up? Yeah, was it a pretty general representation of the public? From what you were able to kind of gather?
It depends on which part of Ukraine you're talking about.
Right.
It was general, but the eastern part of Ukraine, there were a lot of Russian speakers, and they, Stalin was big on shuffling people around. So he put in, he moved all the Tatars out of Crimea. He put in a bunch of Russians. He killed like 20 million kulaks in the Ukraine. No, a lot of people don't know this, but Stalin killed more people than Hitler.
Stalin?
Yeah, Stalin.
Mm-hmm. Stalin.
Killed more people than Hitler. And you hear constantly this idea that about the Russians saved us from the Germans. They sacrificed so much. But Stalin and Hitler had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They basically carved up Europe, and until Hitler's Operation Barbarossa, until Hitler attacked, basically stabbed Stalin in the back, they were allies. Really? At the same time that Hitler invaded Poland from the west, Stalin invaded Ukraine and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland from the east. They were they were in cahoots to carve up Europe. Then Hitler kept marching, and he attacked Russia. So then Russia became an ally. But basically, those countries in the middle had been squeezed between Germany and Russia for their entire histories.
Wow.
And so it's an identity issue that goes back way further. And the Eastern Ukraine had a lot of ethnic Russians, and when the Soviet Union fell apart, they wanted to stay part of Russia. But the majority of Ukrainians, and definitely almost everybody in the West, they want to be part of Europe, and the uprising against the government was beautiful. It really was this incredible spontaneous expression of people power in its truest sense, and it really kind of, the Russian propaganda machine was so effective at labeling them as fascists and controlled by America that I read so many liberal people who generally will bash on the U.S. And I'm usually up there right with them bashing the U.S. But you can't compare the policy. I grew up as a kid, I was in Czechoslovakia. I was born in Czechoslovakia, and the Russian way of imperialism is tanks. The American way of imperialism, here and there they'll bomb you, but mostly it's economic. And there's no comparison. The Russian, everything is very, very, it's blunt. They're blunt people. If you look at, the Russian language, it's impossible to be subtle in Russian. It's give me that beer, say davai, give. And that's basically what they're doing with Ukraine, give. And now it's getting kind of, I'm not going to come across as very anarchistic when I'm talking about Russia because compared to the U.S., they're, the U.S. is a bad guy until you look at Russia or China
or Iran
or North Korea. Or North Korea. And then sitting here in comfort of Canada, the U.S. is our biggest kind of bully next door.
Right.
But that's no comparison to the bully that Ukraine has next door to it. And because people are so used to bashing the U.S., they immediately start blaming Ukraine on the U.S. And it takes away from the Ukrainian people. They really rose up on their own. They kept at it all through winter. And then the Ukrainian government snipers started shooting at armed protesters.
Wow.
And the liberals on the left were still trying to figure out ways of somehow blaming the U.S. for it, or saying that those snipers were actually not from the government, or people just finding excuses. And then they started talking about the fascists in Ukraine and right sector. And I found it fascinating. Even the New York Times, when they talked about Pravi sector, which is there are two right-wing groups in Ukraine that are generally labeled as the Nazis: the right sector and Svoboda. Pravi sector and Svoboda. Svoboda means freedom, and the Pravi sector means right sector. The Times would always translate Pravi sector, they would use it in English, right sector, to show that they were right-wing. Svoboda, freedom, they never translate. It was always just Svoboda.
Yeah, it has no meaning,
Just as an
Unless
abstract.
you know. Yeah.
And when they finally had their elections, the right-wing parties won 2% of the vote. Like, it's nothing. Yes, they were represented, and they were probably more violent than the average, but they're a tiny minority of the population. 84% of the parliament, when they voted a new president, 84% of the parliament was still the same. So the parliament was the one that was elected under the predecessor. So all these people talking about coup, there was a coup in Ukraine. But no, these are the elected representatives of the people elected under the previous jerk, who still voted in the new president. Then there was the election. The people voted in the new president, Poroshenko. And yet the Russians are still presenting it as an illegitimate coup that came in and took over in Ukraine. But if you actually look at what's going on, it's almost surprising that a spontaneous uprising like that worked. I can see it working in Egypt and Tunisia, where the government structures were corrupt for so long and so fragile. But I was surprised it worked in Ukraine, because I thought, these Eastern European governments are more
Why do you think it
organized.
worked then?
Because I think they'd been corrupt for so long, and I think the Ukrainian army refused after the initial, the snipers were, I think they were they were not regular Ukrainian soldiers, and I think the Ukrainian army, Yanukovych tried to get the army he called in the army refused, and that's when he fled to Russia. So as long as you maintain a culture within the army of not total obedience, of kind of keeping their humanity, then usually they won't want to shoot on their own people. Which is why the Ukrainian, or one of the reasons they were so ineffective against the separatists in the east. After what had happened with killing the 100 protesters with snipers, they were really hesitant to fire back, to shoot on their own people, even when half of those were not really their own people. They were coming in from Russia. They were special forces from Russia. There were still half were Ukrainians, and so the army was very hesitant.
Right.
They were also underfunded and poorly trained and everything else.
So they were protesting for how long, roughly? Like in Kiev? It was in Kiev, right?
Just months.
Months.
Yeah, I was following it on RT.
Yeah.
And what you said is about how people who usually bash America, and this story is also against America. That's the same. Don't you that's the same pattern? Like the polarizing. It's U.S. is the bad guy. Therefore, anything that happens in the world, if we're gonna blame U.S. And I see on RT, and if you follow their Facebook page,
RT's gotten
What's RT?
Russian television.
Oh, okay.
But they've become basically more. They tried for a little while to pretend they were objective, and lately they've been so
It's all
straight out biased, just straight out
pro-Russian.
lies. It's like the old Pravda now.
Right.
And a lot of their reporters have quit. There was another one that quit last, a couple of days, maybe yesterday, I think even. It was over the airline, because the Russians were saying that Ukrainians shot down their own airplane.
Right.
Not
yes.
but the Ukrainians shot it down, which makes no sense for them to be shooting up. So then they kept changing stories. The most recent story was that Putin's plane was flying within a few miles of that Malaysian plane, and so that they were actually trying to shoot down Putin, which Putin was nowhere near there. But they buy it. People
So
buy
who
it.
actually shot the plane? Was it Russia or Ukraine?
Oh, definitely wasn't Ukraine. It looks like it was the Russian separatists with Buk missiles from Russia. 3 weeks ago, Russian television published a story about how the separatists had stolen some Buk to shoot up to 10,000 meters, 33,000 feet requires very sophisticated missiles.
Totally.
And they claimed about 3 weeks ago, there was a story on Russian television showing how the separatists had stolen had raided a Ukrainian army base and stolen a Buk missile
So
system.
the Russian separatists are actually Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine that want to go back.
They're a mix. They're a mix of ethnically Russian Ukrainians and Russian special forces sent in to pretend that they're ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. They've shown several of these individuals that were the same person in Crimea, for example, as in eastern Ukraine. So these Russian special operations forces, like Ivan Strelkov is one of the most famous ones. That he's a commander, very distinctive face, and they saw him in Crimea as a local Crimean freedom fighter, and now he's in Donetsk as a local, Eastern. But with the Buk defense system, the Russian television published this article about how they'd gotten it from a Ukrainian base, and then with the shot down airliner, Ukrainian intelligence released all these intercepted communications that they had, showing that the Buk system had come in from Russia. And it's a super sophisticated. If you look at this thing, it's twice the size of a tank.
Wow.
With the missiles are the size of this room, length of this room, because to shoot that high up, it's not something that a bunch of guys in their backyard would.
It's not like a bazooka, just pointing at.
It's not a shoulder. It's not sand.
This is the real deal.
Just amount of fuel to get up that high.
Sure.
And the audio, some of the audio is really, because you can see that first the separatists are saying, "Oh, we shot down an AN-26." They thought they shot down the Ukrainian military transport. Then they send a guy there, and it's like, and they're asking, "Do you see any military?" Like, no. And then there's a Malaysian Airlines logo on there.
Oh wow.
And they're like, "Oh well." Then they were spies. Don't worry, fuck them. Don't worry about it. But it's amazing how Russian television has been changing its story almost on an hourly basis. Because the first few stories they had, this obviously weren't working as propaganda.
Yeah.
And so they were changing it. But in the internet age, people take screenshots and they show what they were showing before. And so like New York Times had a great blog of the rundown of as it's happening and the information. They showed these different Russian television posts and the rebels bragging about shooting down, because they shot down several planes over the last week, Ukrainian jets and a couple of Ukrainian transport planes that fly at the same height almost.
Right. Do you think they just made a mistake?
I'm sure they wouldn't do it on purpose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is terrible PR for them.
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is because there's the thing with that flight too. I've been hearing reports. There's there's a whole group of Dutch people on there, Americans, obviously Malaysians. Like it's just an international flight, of civilians, and now they're, do you think there's going to be any sort of international impingement? Or do you think people are going to start getting involved now, or do you think that was just
when they took
horrible
over,
mistake that's just accepted and let them keep doing their.
The U.S.
feud.
has much less business with Russia, and so they're much more aggressive about sanctions. Europe has a tremendous amount of business, and they're dependent on oil and gas from Russia, and so they don't want to mess with their own business. When Crimea happened, you had the chairman, CEO of Siemens, a big German company, flying to St. Petersburg and hugging Putin to me, our business deals aren't messed up. These corporations, they have no loyalty to your nationality or humanity. All they care about is the bottom line.
Right.
And the bottom line, the sanctions they had the first round were, in a sense, quite brilliant. A lot of people gave Obama flack for very weak sanctions. But what he managed to do is create capital flight from Russia without actually doing any damage to the world economy or to American businesses or even to European businesses. Just by making it look like sanctions could come and escalate, there was something like $70 billion of capital flight in the first quarter from Russia. Russian GDP estimates went from, they were expecting maybe 2.5% to 3% this year, went down to 0. And he just that talking about sanctions in the right way, in a convincing way, made enough businesses pull their money out of Russia just for fear of possible sanctions. That was very effective. But that's not going to go any further until there are real sanctions. And the Europeans, they have too much business at stake. They're too dependent on the natural resources. So people make a lot of noise, and I think they'll be very little substantive.
Really?
The thing that you said about corporations not doing the ethical thing, but and all they care about is their how much money they can make. One of the things that I see people get confused about is the shareholders. Like a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not a couple of people deciding what to do. It's not one person caring about his income. It's a whole bunch of shareholders in the stock market.
Yeah.
So that it's a whole big force behind it. It's not just one
It's a
person,
system.
right?
It's not a person. That's the whole. I would much rather see an evil Darth Vader figure at the top, whom you could confront directly.
Yeah.
And the irony of the ways that corporations are created. You know, Ford, the guy who started Ford Motor Company.
Yeah.
He was in some ways a terrible man. He was a huge anti-Semite. He structured his factories to minimize the number of steps that the workers took from where they lived to where they worked. But he also was a visionary and idealist. And he wanted every American to have a Ford car. And this was his vision. So he owned the majority of, like more than 50% of Ford Motor Company, but he had minority shareholders. And at one point, he started selling the cars very cheaply because in order to fulfill this dream of everybody owning a car. And the minority shareholders sued him. And the court said that if you had justified this as it would make more money in the long term, then it would be a valid legal action. But because you took this action in order to pursue a personal dream that was not oriented around profit, it's illegal. Because you're violating the minority shareholder rights.
That's
so, and again, within the logic of a corporate structure, it makes sense. You and I start a business, I own 51%, you own 49%, we both put money into it, and I decide that I don't care about making money, I'm gonna put all our investments into funding anarchist causes. And you're like, I'm not a fucking anarchist, I'm in this to make money. I'm like, oh, too bad, I own 51%, you're stuck. So I'm using your money to fulfill a personal dream. That's why you have minority shareholder protections. Now, if I told you, funding anarchist causes, in my business view, will end up improving the business climate in the long run and will make more money 10 years down the road, then you couldn't argue because I control the company and it's a long-term business plan. But I have to frame what I do with that money in terms of maximizing profit. A corporation is only allowed one function, which is to make money. And the minute you start trying to use it for something else,
right,
and you're honest about it, you're violating corporate law.
Yeah, that I think is something that many people don't understand.
Yeah.
They think that like Facebook does crazy things and really like starts making money off people. They think that, oh, this Mark guy, he's just ripping us off. They don't understand that there are so many. There is a huge force behind that.
I mean, courts will give a lot of leeway to management to make their decisions as to what will maximize profit in the long run. So you can do altruistic causes if you justify it as this will improve our name and in the long run it will make us more money.
Right.
And the courts will give you that leeway. But you always have to frame it in terms of making money.
Yeah.
That's what corporations are for.
Not doing something good.
Not doing something good.
No.
I mean, to the public you can frame as doing something good, but to the court it has to be, no, this is just to make money.
Right.
And to the shareholders it has to be, this is just to make money.
What's Russia's like kind of angle on the whole Ukraine thing? Like, what's their like? Do they? I mean, because you're saying like the Russian separatists are,
Well,
it's not like the Russian military is perceivably involved, but they seem to be that they are, right? Like through using
covertly, yeah.
Yeah, covertly, yeah. So what's their motive there? Like they don't want to leave. Like
there was a study recently that 64% of Americans couldn't find Ukraine on the map.
Yeah.
And I think that the Russian goal is to make sure that's 100%, because it won't be on the map. Like basically they the goal is to revive the Soviet Union. I think that Putin, as much as I love what he's done for walking around shirtless, that's the only good thing about him.
Here's a side note. Did you hear, I think him and Obama were at some sort of function together, right? But they wanted to go both exercise in like the hotel gym. And but they weren't allowed to go exercise at the same time in the gym together. So they're like, Obama will go first and you go second, right? So Obama goes and starts working out, and he gets on like some aerobic machine or something. And Putin says, "Screw this!" And he goes out. And it's like middle of winter. He goes and jumps in the lake right outside there. Starts swimming lengths in the lake right in front of the where Obama can like actually see him swimming lengths.
Is it a true story?
That's true story. That's very Putin-like.
I appreciate that side of Putin. But
I figured you would. I figured you like that story.
But
anyway, so
no, I think he sees himself as a very Tsarist, old school Tsarist terms, and
what is that? What's a Tsarist?
like a Tsar, a Russian Tsar, like a king.
Okay.
And he feels like that. Russians have always felt wrong. It's a big part of the Russian psyche to be the victim, and they've managed to become the biggest country in the world, but they're still the victim.
Yeah. What's the population of Russia, roughly? If you had to guess.
Shrinking all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have a very low birth rate and high
Bigger
mortality.
than the U.S.?
Yeah. No, not anymore.
The U.S. is like 300 million.
It's 300 million. Yeah, Soviet Union was 300 million. I think now it's
Maybe
like
150.
150
Can I
or something
check?
like that.
Yeah, I Google it up. I was curious.
I'm guessing 150.
Russia population,
Ah,
we have.
143.5
No,
as of 2012. So
Which one is it? Is it
the
this
blue
one?
one. Yeah,
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
that's in 2012. So
143.
yeah, 150. There you go. But
Half the U.S.
it's half the U.S.
Almost,
population.
yeah.
But they have
I have a very politically incorrect theory of the Russian psyche, and it comes from being Eastern European. And you know, Eastern Europeans will always say negative things about the country to their east, which is
Okay.
why it's so unusual that I'm saying positive things about Ukraine. I'll be banned from the Slavic picnic table. But you know, the Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde, took over Moscow for 200 years, and I think that impacted the Russian psyche for ever since. And Russia has tried to make itself European. Like the worst insult you can say to Russians is that you're uncultured, nekulturny. And you know, Peter Great, Catherine the Great, they've all tried to make Russia European, but at the same time there's a directness that, and to all Slavs, I mean, it's not just Russians, there's a directness that sometimes I miss living here. But there's also, it is much more of a, you know, you have something I want, give it to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And they want the territory, and they feel wronged by the breakup of the Soviet Union. They feel like they were a world power, and now they're not, and they don't like that.
Right.
Like it's not that complicated calculus.
Yeah.
They lost a huge amount. Like they were 300 million, now they're 150 million because they lost so
Yeah,
much.
that's a
population
massive
with
hit
their land.
to every aspect of their
But
society.
the bottom line is those other 15 republics that they were controlling as the Soviet Union were, you know, Russia doesn't have a right to a sphere of influence, neither does America. Like, I think as Canadians, if the Americans said, no, we get to control what happens in Canada because it's in our sphere of influence, we'd say, fuck you. Or we should say, fuck you. I wish we would say, fuck you more. But especially with Harper making Canada so much like the States are trying to. Anyway, different subject. Russia thinks that it has a right to control Ukraine because it was traditionally in its sphere of influence. And a lot of people are kind of buying that argument, which to me makes no sense. Let the Ukrainians decide.
Right.
You know, you don't get to have a sphere of influence just because you're a bully.
Yeah. Where do you see this going? Like how? Like, can you predict? Do you know what's going to happen?
I can't predict the weather in Vancouver the next day, so.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those events that they've been playing out for. It's been well over a year now, and it's just kind of evolved, and now it's. Yeah. I mean, with obviously the tragedy of yesterday being a massive mistake, and it's gonna make huge. I mean, news. Obviously, I think like you said, it's gonna be a lot of voices, but you're thinking not much is gonna.
I don't think Russia wants to
maneuver from
invade.
it.
I don't think Russia wants to. I think they want to keep Ukraine weak and unstable. I think they want to keep it in its sphere of influence. They have a lot of practice with this kind of maintaining satellites that are loyal to them without the cost of a full invasion. Or
Is the U.S. involved in any way?
I think the U.S. is. I think it's much less involved than people think. I think the U.S. is giving advice. They're giving information. I think they're giving satellite imagery and communication. But I think it's on that level. I don't think they're.
They're not troops or
Basically,
anything
they're
like
giving
that.
intelligence and they're giving advice. I don't think they have troops on the ground at all.
Do you see the?
I think it'd be dangerous for them to, because this is being fought so much as a propaganda war.
Yeah.
That the U.S. would be stupid, and it would be counterproductive for the U.S. to actually send advisors or any kind of soldiers in, because it would be the equivalent of Russia shooting down the airliner. This is a propaganda war, and overreaching like that is just it's counterproductive.
Have you heard? Sorry, this is completely other tangent. Have you heard that the U.S. is now like the world's largest supplier of oil?
That was on the news, I think.
Yeah.
That was on the news.
Have you heard this?
No.
Okay.
Only recently, like in the past.
Yeah, they're now the
Mm,
largest
I see that.
supplier of oil, which is, I don't know.
They're doing fracking. I
Yeah.
think a huge part of that is they're doing a lot of fracking, and a lot of environmental disasters happen, which don't get reported on the news. But
And basically,
I've
the
heard-
reason I'm kind of getting into this, I'm just curious as to what you see as like the state of the U.S. economy and kind of
Well,
where
just
it's all going.
I heard something that they had like a lot of oil reserves in the States, like all over the place in the States that they didn't tap and they saved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, most countries do that, partially to maintain the price of oil up. But just, it's a little bit off of your question, but I think that the single biggest mistake over the last 10 years, well, it's more than 10 years, last 20 years, was when September 11th happened, George Bush had an amazing opportunity to impose a gasoline tax, like a floor, say $5 a gallon floor, and just say, because of this, we will never let oil go below $5 a gallon. We will maintain the difference between the world price, and that will be taxed. So that put a huge amount of incentive into, because I do believe in working within capitalist incentive structures, give people proper incentives. And if you had created a structure where, the world price at that time was about $2 a gallon. Now it's 4 something in the US, but it was $2. If you say the price at the pump will be $5, and we guarantee that it will never go below 5, so you guys can invest in clean technology, you can invest in alternative fuels, you can invest in better mileage gas. Because a lot of reasons business don't, because the incentives aren't there. Gas might go up, might go down, might do different things, so there isn't that certain, business-like certainty. So if they had created this promise that gas at the pump would never go below $5, been huge amount of money pumped into alternative investments, the world price would have crashed because the oil markets would have seen that all these alternatives
What would
are
have
coming
crashed,
up.
sorry?
The world price of oil.
Okay.
Oil right now is about 3/4 of the price of oil is speculative. There isn't as big a shortage as people make it sound. The true price of oil is based on pure volumes that are being used and that are being pumped out of the ground, and projections in the future is 1/4 of what it's at. But because everybody's predicting that it can only go in one direction, we have to run out. We've speculated. The markets have bid the price of oil up, like a commodity, like gold. Based on supply and
Because
demand.
you think it's scarce.
Yeah,
it's gonna
people
be
think
more
it's
valuable.
scarce,
Yeah.
and the more people think it's scarce, the more it becomes scarce, because the more people want it. And so we've bid the price of oil up to about 4 times, which is good in the sense of promoting alternatives. But that difference could have all gone to taxes, and those taxes could have been used for a huge amount of good.
Why would 9/11 given him that opportunity to do it, though?
Because that was the only chance that if they had presented as a national security issue. Look, we were attacked by Saudi Arabia. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, all the world basket case, all the evil countries in the world, or most of them, are funded purely by oil. They're kept afloat by oil. If we can collapse the world price of oil, we will bankrupt those countries. If oil fell under 100, basically for Russia to stay in surplus, oil has to be over $105 a barrel. If oil is under 105 a barrel, Russia starts going into deficit in its economy. So if George Bush had promised that we are going to create a floor on the price of gas at the pump, the actual world price would never have come up to 4, something like it did now. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia would be bankrupt, so they would have to start giving in to pressures for change. Corruption is economically, it's not a good economic system. You don't have innovation, you don't have growth. If you look at how Russia is becoming more and more dependent, just like Saudi Arabia and all these other basket case countries, the percentage of Russian GDP that's like manufacturing, it's fallen down to, I think it's like 15% now. It's falling because they're completely dependent on oil. And a Republican could have gotten away with higher taxes much more easily than a Democrat. But most importantly, it could be their national security. You know, just like that, they had that power to invade Afghanistan and Iraq because people were still traumatized by September 11th. They would have had the will, all the people coming together. Bush, who has the IQ of a potato, had like 90% support ratings right after September 11th.
Yeah. So he could have
So
done it.
he could have done it, and he could have actually done this amazing good. Now there's no chance. If Obama tried to raise the price of the gasoline tax,
Yeah.
would have been he'd be impeached.
So yeah, that's
There were a whole bunch of stuff that they took advantage of.
They took advantage of all the wrong stuff.
A lot of
All the wrong stuff.
Right.
Like
That's why
which
a lot of
tells you
people argue
what
that.
does it tell you about them then?
Yeah.
that they're in the pockets of corporations. Halliburton made it.
Well, it's an obvious thing, though. We know for a fact who funds these
Yeah.
people, and often they're in the same group, like the same society. Like the John Kerry versus George Bush, it was pure nonsense because both of them were from Skull and Bones secret society. Like it's not even secret anymore. Like they're there. It's you know about that. The Skull
Yeah,
and Bones?
I think those. I mean, I was invited to Lincoln's Inn, which is the Harvard version of the Skull and Bones,
Right.
and it's not nearly as nefarious as people.
No, but
make
it's
it
still the
sound-
same interest, right? I
Yeah.
think at least they get around and come up with like things. It's not as
But
crazy.
I think even worse than having evil people, you don't really have strong people come through anymore. You don't have people with like a strong inner sense of purpose. Like when Obama was being elected, you know, Obama wasn't. There's nothing but Lincoln's Inn. I don't even know if he was in Lincoln's Inn. It's not as Skull and Bones is more secret society, and Yale is much more of a family. Like Harvard didn't want to know about my financial status at all until after I got a yes or no. Yale was all about what family members went to this school and all. Because I got into Yale as well, but their application was all, about family. Then their grades. I mean, the grades and your
course,
LSATs and stuff were important too, but they still wanted to know that information. But Obama's passed in Harvard Law because Obama went to Harvard Law.
Yeah.
He was president of the Harvard Law Review, and when he was in 2008, everybody was so excited. First black president. I was like, no, he was president of the Harvard Law Review. You can't. The guy will have no spine.
Right.
And the structure for getting into the law review was all consensus. It was all talking. If you had any kind of, it's such an insular network. And the people who come there, they're not going there to be lawyers by and large. They're going in there to be politicians. We didn't learn law. We learned how to write laws. We didn't learn what the laws are. We learned how should you decide what a fair and just law would be, and stuff like that. And this, the intolerance of weirdnesses or of any kind of idiosyncrasies, it got narrower and narrower because everybody wanted to be safe. Everybody wanted to be cautious. People calculated that 3 comments every 5 classes would optimize their reputation for intelligence without make them look like a gunner.
That's for real?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I don't know if the number was 3 out of 5, but
What
it
was your
definitely
record?
was.
How many?
Oh, I walked in there with my hand up. I got bashed pretty good by some of the professors, but the professors liked it. I had fun with the professors.
Yeah.
Alan Dershowitz told me I should go in my own room and masturbate once. He actually has the exact quote where you should put a sign on your door saying you are now entering a state of nature, and you can walk in there and engage in any autoerotic activities you like. But so even then, he was telling me I should be in a state of nature. But anyway, things like that, it really freaked people out because they got so cautious. We had one professor who you had to write a note if you were unprepared, and he would grill you, and if you didn't want to be grilled that day, that you didn't do the reading, you had to bring a note ahead of time, and just had to have one word, unprepared, and you had to bring him to his office hours before class. And if you hadn't given him that note, then you were going to be in big trouble. And people would freak out. They would be stressing out, like that the teacher might catch them unprepared. I was like, so what? I didn't have time to do the fucking reading. Like, it's not the end of the world. You know, you're not going to fail me over one day of not. But people got so uptight about anything. And then more and more, like, people would sit there. I actually heard people obsessing about, well, if I get an A, should I tell people I got an A? Because then if I don't tell them I got an A the other time, then they'll know I didn't get an A. They were just calculating everything, and that's the type of people who, like, succeed. That's how they get into the law review, and it's really, really cautious people. And Obama is a very intelligent man, but he's so damn cautious.
Yeah.
Like, he's
been bound.
And all these super PACs, they have a lot of influence too. Like, people who fund their suit, like Obama's super PAC.
Well, that's just a way of hiding the money, right? It's a way of donating much more without.
But that's one of the ways they
that's
get
one
the
of the
influence,
ways.
right?
But it's happening on every front. I mean, with the Supreme Court saying that money is speech, that corporations have free speech rights, that corporations have religious rights now. And that's the thing I don't get. I don't get how somebody can call themselves a libertarian and see that their fundamental the impacts of the people they're supporting is so anti-individual.
Right.
Like, I have a problem with the whole guild structure of doctors to begin with. In Bali, you want OxyContin, you went to pharmacy, asked for OxyContin, you got OxyContin. I never went and did OxyContin. But if I wanted to, it was my business.
Right.
And choosing the drug was between me and my doctor.
Right.
If I want to go to the doctor. If I want to just heal myself, I healed myself. Here, at least it should be between the patient and her doctor. But now they want, the employer and the insurance company all controlling what kind of contraception, you can get on your health plan. And they're framing it in terms of liberty, like individual rights, but it's not individual. It's again, these group rights, and it's the language, the arguments are so twisted, and people buy into a side, and then they'll just kind of go along with the argument. I have a good example from law school, because I was in Alan Dershowitz's class during the OJ trial, and he was on the OJ team.
Right.
And it seemed pretty clear that what happened in the OJ case was OJ killed his wife, and the cops planted evidence. Both things were true, yes.
Whoa.
And people had such a hard time seeing both sides of it. They either, the intent is split by race, they believed that the cops, they saw that there was very clear evidence that, not even the glove, but like the socks, for example, the blood went through the sock. If it had been on somebody's foot, it wouldn't have gone from one side to the other.
Right.
And the cops lied all throughout. Oh, we didn't suspect him at all. 50% of murders are committed by the spouse, so obviously they suspected him from the beginning. It would be a stupid cop if he didn't suspect the husband. But anyway, it's almost for sure both things happened.
Why
but
did
the black, they do this all the time. Cops plant evidence all the time. But
why?
To make sure the bad guys go to jail.
Really? Just to make it easier, make it more definitive?
Because they don't want the lawyers to screw it up. In Chicago, shortly after the OJ trial, there was a whole case, they were planting fingerprints, and it came out. But again, it wasn't a famous person, so the news didn't make it that big.
Right.
OJ had the money and the fame to show. And the thing is, cops don't plant evidence because they're corrupt. They're planting evidence on guys that they know did it, but they know that the legal... Basically, the way...
They're just trying to strengthen their case.
They're trying to strengthen their case.
Yeah.
People look at the ultimate purpose.
Right.
Or they look at the ultimate truth. OJ did it. And so they don't want to believe the intermediate truth, which is the cops planted evidence. Or they focus on the intermediate truth, well, the cops planted evidence, so that means OJ must not have done it.
Yeah.
Right.
And people have a very hard time seeing conflicting
Again, that black
truths.
and white thing.
Yeah,
they don't see them.
They have a hard
between.
time kind of compartmentalizing the stages of the process. And then that's why you see so many people, when their side makes a completely ridiculous argument, and as long as, like, it bashes George Bush, it must be right.
Right.
And I'm all for bashing George Bush, but that doesn't mean that he planned September 11th.
Yeah, that's a huge kind of thing that people, I think is starting to change a little bit. But just like you're saying, the whole notion of black or white, like yes or no, where most things are always in that in between kind of shades of gray, and it's
But it's not even in between, because that's the other dangerous people, this fallacy of the middle where, Republicans say this and Democrats say this, and all the truth must be somewhere in the middle. Well, no, sometimes one side is just bonkers.
True.
And and the media tend to do this, and I think the Republicans have learned this. They can say complete lies, and the media don't want to pick a side, so they'll report both sides as equally.
Well, by middle, I think we, like people like us, would mean that something actually totally different, like a whole different scenario, like in the OJ and the police. Or,
But I guess my view would be there's not something different. Is that you have to focus. You have to have a clarity of thought or the precision to see what are you talking about. These are different issues, and we shouldn't just go with our emotions as people are too emotional, I think, in terms of evaluating facts. They should be more critical. What are we talking about? Did he plant the evidence, or are we talking about did he actually do it? And why are we conflating those two? Like, be critical within our own minds of how the chain of events or the chain of thoughts, not conflate things. I think we have as a species, it's so much easier to change facts to match our emotions than to actually change our emotions to match the facts. And the more intelligent you are, the more easier it is actually, because you can rationalize facts, you can twist them around, you can use them as Play-Doh. And on top of that, we have a culture that keeps talking about validating your emotions and getting in touch and being in the now. I think that's all bullshit. You should repress yourself a little more. Be like, there was a reason the British had the biggest empires, because they were the fucking most repressed people on the planet. And they were able to withhold gratification, to not be in the now, to think. And I'm not saying you should, not in all contexts, obviously. Again, it's important to know which context to be emotional in, which ones to be rational in. But this general gist of let's just live in the moment, and whatever you feel must be right because you're feeling it. Like, no, the limbic system is the most primitive part of our brains, and it's the one that generally controls. And it takes a lot of effort of will to not have that control your absorption of facts.
Right.
And it's almost impossible. Like, the way the human brain works, if you look at the way the neurons work, our brain sends as much information, actually more information to the eyes as the eyes send to the brain. Because we work with stereotypes. It's called invariant representation in neurobiology. We see a portion of something, and in order to save processing time, like if I always saw you as a new person, it would waste a huge amount of neuronal space and activity. It would slow me down. I'd be slow. All my reactions would be slow because I'd have to recognize you. Oh, that's a nose. Those are eyes. Those are eyebrows. Put them together. Oh, that makes Mike. So what happens is my brain sees you. It creates a pattern. It creates a stereotype in my brain. That's Mike. That's Mike's face. Puts it in the brain. So then I glance at you. I get very limited information. And then the brain sends the information back to my eyes saying, oh, that's probably Mike. And then it might not even be Mike, but the brain has already sent that information to Mike. And that's why we make mistakes with stereotypes as well. But we couldn't function if we didn't stereotype. We couldn't function if we didn't have that feedback process from the brain back. And the problem is that we apply it not just in an efficient way, but we become lazy.
Yeah.
And
well, and I read one place too that the limbic system of our brain actually works in a very binary way, like on, off, 1, 2 sort of thing. And I wonder if that's kind of like why people have this kind of struggle with like those issues we were talking about before. Is it kind of this propagation of that primitive part of our brain, like right, wrong, or this or that, you know what I mean? Like that's how it kind of works. It's either like it's either threat or not threat.
Left or right.
That's basically all it is. You know what I mean? It's a very simple nervous system that's used to make very basic decisions. Like, oh, I hit a wall, I turn now. You know what I mean? Like very sense kind of like this reactive to whatever environment it's in. You know what I mean? That's probably how it evolved too. I had another point I wanted to make too. What was it? I don't remember, but yeah, that was.
Need more beer.
Yeah, no, this is what is it? Red Racer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expected something that was very potent.
This is very
It is
very
potent.
earnest. This conversation. That was. We actually talked about real substantial stuff. I don't like that.
That's the whole point. No, that's the whole point. We wanted the point of this. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point of the podcast in general, as a form of media. Not just this podcast, but any podcast is ability to speak about things without any censorship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can and we can broadcast it. We can put it out there,
And you can drink beer while we're broadcasting it.
That's
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
we can have our Anarchist Lawyer episodes and and give you a little bit of a soapbox and then and drink our beer and and just I don't know, we get to like dive into the nitty gritty of shit and pull it out and poke at it and be like, I don't know, maybe yes or no. Do I agree with everything you say all the time? Definitely not. But that's the whole point.
That is the whole point.
So and that's a good thing.
People
I would
need-
like to have more
yeah.
sarcasm next time and snark.
should work on
I'm a big fan of snark.
I should work on my
Snark.
snarkiness.
But we were not
I'll
snarky
work
at
on it.
all.
I'll practice for next time you come on. And
We should really endeavor to insult each other more and
Yeah, it was
be
too
snarky.
way too
uh,
nice
Do you,
at the
it was
beginning.
too
are
nice.
you a fan of George Carlin? then?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. There you go.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it up for this episode. Alex, Boldy, thank you for coming on. The
Thanks a lot.
Anarchist
having me.
Lawyer
It was fun.
made his internet debut.
If I ever get that bone broth book published, I'll want
Yes,
to come back and
yeah.
talk about bones.
Absolutely.
There's
Yes.
so many innuendos you can make with bones. It's
Yeah. So yeah, that's another thing. You being a writer, he's doing a whole book. Tell him in a synopsis. What is your book? What is it?
the bone broth book.
Yeah. It's a recipe for all bone broths, right?
It's using bone broth to heal your bones.
And why did you do this? Because you had
you had
injury,
injury.
right?
Because my ribs seem to have turned into brittle sticks. No, I broke a rib 6 weeks before the World Championships in Jiu-Jitsu, and my son said, "You're still gonna go, right?" So I kind of had to, and so then I tried to heal my rib as quickly as I could.
Was that against that really big dude?
No, that was the next set of ribs I broke.
Oh, okay.
Well, not set, but other side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy was. He was
He
265.
made you look small.
He was 265, and he was on the Canadian wrestling team for the 2012 Olympics. So he was like a current Olympian. And yeah, he tossed me.
He tossed you well, eh?
He tossed me like
When
Like
I
a bear.
don't know exactly when your rib broke. I watched that video, but I think he was just almost bouncing on your chest a little bit or something.
I think I almost broke my own rib. I think it was my own fault. I can't really blame him.
I broke my own rib.
And then I remember you just kind of writhed in agony. You're just like, "Rah!"
Yeah, it wasn't.
And then-
it
Yeah,
wasn't
that was awful. It was
Yeah.
like my ribs were piano keys and they wouldn't stop moving. They were moving by themselves and they just wouldn't stop.
Oh,
And it was really
wow.
freaky because it was just like this.
Was it painful the whole time?
It was extremely painful, but the freakiest thing was that they wouldn't stop that
Moving.
piano
Why was it
movement.
moving?
I think it was
spasms?
spasm. I think it was because what actually happened is that the ER doctor told me I broke my rib, but when the radiologist report came in, it was just I ripped it off the sternum, and so I guess when it popped out, all those muscles were
in spasm.
spazzing,
right.
And since the rib had been ripped off and the muscles were spazzing, the rib was kind of dancing around.
Could you see it through your chest?
Yeah, I could see it, and I
Whoa.
could feel it. It was freaky. Like it actually. It was something like out of an alien movie.
Something's gonna pop out of your chest.
Yeah. Oh, but if it just popped once, it'd be fine.
Yeah,
things
but it kept
happen.
going. It
But it
just-
just
it was
kept
clawing at the
it kept
surface.
just dancing around, and it was like I had a
freaked
couple
you
of
out.
mice having a fight under my.
Yeah. Well, and
It
on that
sucked.
note, let's
We'll wrap it up.
dancing ribs.
Yeah.
Man, thanks for coming on. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Your website, is it still live?
We should have
It
said
is.
at
Yeah.
the beginning because we're pretty far. in.
Boldizar.com.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're still here, I commend your endurance. That was awesome.
How long was that?
Boldizar.com.
Oh, that was
check
a
them
good
out.
one.
All
Yeah.
right. And that's a wrap.
All right.
To whatever it is.
To whatever it is.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Bye.